Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here today to hear our fantastic speaker, Elliot Abrams. So I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. Before I do that, I'll tell you we'll be here in the chapel for about an hour. Elliot is going to talk a little bit about his book and the topics he addresses there. I think he may also say something about the situation in Israel today. This is a field of expertise, of course, for him. And then after he presents, we'll have the opportunity to ask questions. So I'm going to have a microphone. I'll go around the chapel. You can feel free to ask questions, and we'll have a conversation with Elliot. And then when we're done in here, we're going to go downstairs to the library where we have copies of Elliot's book. He'll sign copies. If you'd like to purchase a copy of the book, you can do that, and we're going to have brunch together. So that's our program for the morning. So I am delighted to welcome our guest speaker, Elliot Abrams. He is the Senior Fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. He served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor in the administration of President George W. Bush, where he supervised U.S. policy in the Middle East for the White House, and as Special Representative for Iran and Venezuela in the administration of Donald Trump. Elliot Abrams was educated at Harvard College, the London School of Economics, and Harvard Law School. After serving on the staffs of Senators Henry M. Jackson and Daniel P. Moynihan, he was an Assistant Secretary of State in the Reagan administration and received the Secretary of State's Distinguished Service Award from Secretary George P. Shultz. In 2012, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy gave him its Scholar Statesman Award. He joined the Bush administration in June 2001 as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director of the National Security Council for Democracy, Human Rights, and International Organizations. He rejoined the State Department in January 2019 as Special Representative for Venezuela, and in August 2020, took on the additional position of Special Representative for Iran. He left the State Department in January 2021. He's the author of 5 books and the editor of 3 more. And most importantly, he is the brother of Frank Abrams, our past president. So let's welcome Elliot Abrams to Temple Beth-El. Welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for being here. It's great to be back here. My parents, our parents, moved here in 1965, and I remember coming to high holiday services here when Rabbi Davidson was the new rabbi. Rabbi Rudin was alive. Rabbi Rudin would come for the high holiday services and deliver a sermon. So this is Great Neck history. But I haven't been here, I must say, for quite a while. So it's very nice to be back here. I want to talk first about the book, and that'll segue into why I think Israel is so important for American Jews, and then talk about Israel. We think of ourselves, I think, as a very successful community, American Jews. And in many ways, we are. If you think of educational levels, if you think of income levels, if you think of how we've kind of assimilated into America, it's a tremendous success. But we're not so successful as a Jewish community, particularly if you compare us to other Jewish communities, the British, the French, the Australian, the Canadian. We're really not doing so well. What do I mean? A few examples. There's 2.4 million children in the United States today who live in a home with 2 Jewish parents or 1 Jewish parent. How many of them are being raised exclusively as Jews? Half. Just half. The other half are being raised as Christians, or Christians and Jews, or nothing. Half. Now, how many of them are going to grow up with the strong feeling of Jewish identity, Jewish peoplehood? Not so many. Ask another question. How many Jews, what proportion of Jews in the United States say they care a lot about whether their grandchildren are Jewish? 1/3 of all Jews in the US say it's very important to them that their grandchildren be Jewish. 1/3. That's not a very good number if you're thinking about peoplehood. I always like to tell a story about the Duke of Wellington. He did not come from a great aristocratic family. And at some dinner, he was asked by a lady who did come from a great aristocratic family, Duke, from whom are you descended? And the Duke of Wellington replied, Madam, I am not a descendant, I am an ancestor. That's the question. Are we ancestors? We're descendants of thousands of years of Jews. Are we ancestors of more generations of Jews? Well, there's an awful lot of American Jews who say it's not very important to them that their grandchildren be Jewish. I'll stop with the numbers now, but why is this happening? You know, in some way, it's a great thing about America, right? It's assimilation. It's open society. It happens to everybody. If you think of old Hollywood movies about the big Irish or Italian families, that doesn't happen anymore. It's assimilation. It's happening to Jews. So we all understand it. I mean, Franklin and I were raised in a family where we had living immigrant grandparents who spoke Yiddish most of the time, whose ability to read English was quite limited. Well, that doesn't really happen anymore. I mean, my children didn't know those grandparents. They were gone. So it's a generational change. If you go back to those days, I'm not talking about 100 years ago, I'm talking about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. Jews lived in a pretty immersive Jewish experience. For one thing, there were restrictions. There were neighborhoods where Jews couldn't live. There were hotels where Jews couldn't go. There were companies that didn't hire Jews. And what about intermarriage? Well, there wasn't much intermarriage because Christians wouldn't marry Jews. Well, all that has changed. If you grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you didn't live in a dense Jewish neighborhood, most likely. Maybe if you were Orthodox, okay, yes, you did, because you had to be able to walk to synagogue. If you were not Orthodox, you lived in America. You lived most likely in a suburb. That's what happened after World War II. Jews moved to the suburbs. So the kind of immersive Jewish experience that the immigrants lived when they got here, that their children lived, that even someone like me as a grandchild had a sense of, it's gone. It's gone. It isn't surprising then that we see these numbers in many others where a lot of young Jews are kind of drifting away from Jewishness, Jewish identity, a sense of Jewish peoplehood. And what I mean by that is the sense that they are descended from thousands of years of Jews. They're the inheritors of this vertically, but also horizontally around the world. They are the same people, the Jewish people, as the British Jews and the French Jews and the Australian Jews and the Canadian Jews. That sense is clearly diminishing. People have said to me, yeah, well, that may have been true, but it isn't true anymore because of the last year. That's not very likely. I mean, I've had people tell me, well, but the numbers of conversions are up and the numbers of this are up. You know, most of you here lived through the 67 and 73 wars. And I remember people saying, this changes everything. The American Jewish community will be completely different now. Didn't happen. You know, if you look at things like Israel bond sales or visits to Israel, yeah, they went up after the 67 war for a year or two, and then they came down. Today, we've had 20 years of birthright, 20 years of birthright. Tens of thousands of American Jewish kids have been taken to Israel by birthright. With that, 45% of American Jews have ever been to Israel one time. If you look at the French Jews, the Australian Jews, it's not just Australia is as far from Israel as we are. About 80% have been to Israel, almost twice as much. So 67, 73 did not transform the American Jewish community. I'm not at all confident that what we're seeing now will change the American Jewish community. How about campus anti-Semitism, demonstrations for Hamas? There's one good study so far of what's going on campus by a professor at Tufts named Eitan Hirsch. And what does he find? You know, it's not shocking what he finds. The reaction of Jewish students on campus tends to be the product of what they came to campus with. That is, if they came with a strong Jewish identity, or any real Jewish identity, the impact of seeing all these pro-Hamas demonstrations is to strengthen their Jewish identity. They become activists on campus. What about students with no Jewish background? What do I mean by Jewish background? Were you bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah? Does your family belong to a synagogue? Have you ever been to Israel? Those kinds of questions. The students who arrive on campus with a poor Jewish background don't overnight convert, in a sense, and become Jewish activists. Oh, sure, it'll happen to some of them. But statistically, it doesn't happen. They just, it's not happening to them because they don't feel it. So the question that I try to answer in the book is, okay, if you care, what do you do about it? You're an official of a Jewish organization. You're a philanthropist. You're a grandparent. You're a parent. What do you do? Now, I wrote a book about this in 1997 called Faith or Fear. And what it said was ethnicity is not going to keep people Jewish because it's fading. Remembering the Holocaust is not going to keep people Jewish. One thing will keep people Jewish, and that's Judaism. Well, that's not wrong. You look at the Orthodox community, they're actually growing. It's not wrong advice, but it's impractical advice. I mean, you can't say to somebody, you know what, you should be more religious. That is not sensible advice to give. What about the rest of us, the 90% of us that are not Orthodox? What I argue in the book is that there are three things that we can see that works. Three things that work because they create that kind of immersion of Jews, young Jews with other Jews doing Jewish things. First, education. More kids go to Jewish schools in every other diaspora community. Canada, again, Europe, in every one of them, more kids go to Jewish schools. That's talking about day schools. We've also had an experiment now for, you can go back to World War II, let's say 75 years, with Hebrew school education. I apologize for this. I don't know anything about the Hebrew school education at Temple Beth-El. But I do know something about the Hebrew school education in America. What's the model? Every synagogue has its own Hebrew school. And kids go there. I've got it, thank you. Kids go there until they're bar mitzvah, and they tend to leave. Do you know the joke, the story about the church and the synagogue are right next to each other, so the rabbi and the priest know each other pretty well. And one day the rabbi sees the priest, and the priest is very glum. And the rabbi says, "What's the matter, Father?" Says in the church tower, in the bell tower, the belfry, we're infested with bats, and we can't get rid of them. Bats! And the rabbi laughs and says, "You can't get rid of the bats? I know how." The priest says, "Really? What do I do?" And the rabbi says, "Bar mitzvah them. You'll never see them again." That's a problem. That's a problem. And in a way, it's kind of normal, right? Why would we think that every single synagogue in America is going to have a terrific Hebrew school? I went to Hebrew school until bar mitzvah. It was awful. I mean, it was boring. I didn't learn anything that I can remember anyway. There were experiments in some synagogues, some communities. I'll give you an example. Houston, where the synagogues have come together to do post-bar and bat mitzvah activities. They rotate from one synagogue to another in an effort to do a kind of better, more enriched experience, also a social experience. Now, maybe that only works in a medium-sized community. Doesn't work if you have 10 Jews, doesn't work in New York, maybe. But more of that kind of experimenting is needed. One, education. Two, writing the book, I spoke to the rabbi of Boise, Idaho. Now, as you would figure, this is not one of America's great Jewish communities. They have nothing, right? They have no Jewish community center. They have nothing, basically. And I said to him, "So how do kids have any Jewish experiences, any Jewish identity?" There's one synagogue. And he said, "Camp." And that's my second point. Jewish summer camping. I think very often we think of it as, oh, that's nice. It's not nice, it's critical. Because what is it? It's an immersive Jewish experience for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, young Jews doing Jewish things together with role models, the counselors. And in more and more camps nowadays, with Israeli counselors too, who come to spend the summer. There's data on this that shows it matters. It matters in creating a sense of Jewish identity for Jewish kids. Now, a lot of Jewish kids do go to camp. I mean, you got to do something during the summer. It tends to be, if you think of income in quartiles, the middle. The top, the richest, often don't go to camp because their family has a summer home or they're traveling for the summer, and the poorest quartile can't afford it. It's the middle, 50% say, that tends to go to camp more. Well, we need to make that available to more Jewish kids who want to go, whose parents would love them to go, who would like themselves to go and they can't afford it. And there are efforts to do this. Marcus Foundation has one, for example, where they help pay for the first year. There are different theories about, some say, just pay for the first year and then the kids will get hooked. And the parents will get hooked with having the kids away from. And so after that, the family will take it on as something they want to put in their budget. But camp works, and it matters. If you look at Jewish organizations in the country, NGOs, philanthropies, look at the staffs. An amazing percentage have been counselors at Jewish camps. Third, Israel. What can we do to strengthen or create this sense of Jewish identity, Jewish peoplehood? Time in Israel. Now, again, we've had birthright for 20 years. There have been lots of studies of birthright. And birthright is 10 days, or as I sometimes put it, 10 lousy days. And it can be life-changing. not for everyone. If you look at the statistics, a third of the people who go to birthright for 10 lousy days haven't been back in the next 10 years after that. Now, there are reasons for that. Maybe they had to finish school, maybe they got married, maybe they had young children, but many of the people who went through birthright say it changed everything. Now, that's 10 days. What about a month? And birthright does this, by the way. They figured this out. So now birthright has lots of one-month programs, all summer programs. What about going to Israel for a summer? Summer camp in Israel. What about high school semester? What about gap year, which is something that Sharansky is very big on, which the student gets a chance to mature a little bit before college, spend a year there, learn Hebrew. What about junior year abroad? You know, instead of going to, well, everyone has his own example. Let's say Switzerland. Go to Israel for junior year abroad. And that doesn't cost any more. It may cost less than the tuition you're paying at college. The more time, the better. That's clear. And think about this for American students, let's say. You're 19. What are you concerned about? Exams, the ultimate Frisbee competition, the school's football team. Your 19-year-old Israeli cousins are fighting and dying for their country. It's a revelation for American teenagers to meet their counterparts in Israel. This is also very important for Israel because what are the pillars of support for Israel in the U.S.? Well, young Democrats are turning away from Israel. Well, young evangelicals are turning away from Israel. Young Jews, to some extent, are turning away from Israel. The level of support are coming down, not rising. So the Israelis need all the help they can get in terms of having a community of people in the U.S. who are actively pro-Israel. And we, I think, we need them to maintain the vitality of the American Jewish community. Let me just turn to what we're seeing now. Now, this morning, about 110 rockets shot into Israel from Lebanon. Today. What Israel, Rabbi and I were talking about this just before, what the Israelis have accomplished in what, a month, 6 weeks, is astonishing, and no one would have believed it, which I think suggests that a lot of the U.S. advice to Israel, take the win, stop, don't go into Rafah, no escalation, no confrontation, was wrong. Because the Israelis have gained a lot from what they've done in this month or so in changing the situation. If you look at Israel, take a date 6 months ago, surrounded by what they call the ring of fire that Iran had built. Iran, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza. And the Iranians were undertaking a big buildup in the West Bank. Lots of arms coming into the West Bank through Jordan. And they seem to have no way out of it. And people were asking, well, they're going to be strangled by this. What future do they have? And they've broken it. They have broken it. First in Gaza and now in Lebanon. They really now have shown, first of all, that they're back as the most powerful country in the Middle East. Real deterrence against their enemies. Now, it isn't over yet. This round of fighting isn't over yet, not in Gaza or Lebanon, and surely within the next couple of weeks we will see the Israeli reply to Iran for the attack by nearly 200 missiles, ballistic missiles, that hit Israel. I'm quite optimistic about their prospects, but the sacrifice is going to be considerable. It's very clear, for example, they need a larger army. The reserve system that they've used really since 1948 is based on the idea that a war is a week. The longest war they ever fought was the 2006 Lebanon War, 34 days. You can do that with reservists, though it's hard. But now, a year? If you talk to reservists, they've been in the army, not in their homes, not in their jobs, for most of the last year. You know, they get a month off to go home, and as we were discussing, I have a nephew in this category. He's about 40, and he's been in Gaza most of the last year. Yeah, he came home for September, and now he's back. And his unit in northern Gaza was the one that was hit about 2 weeks ago, and 3 of his colleagues in that unit were killed and several more injured. Thank God he was not injured. But he emailed all of us what had happened, and what did he do the following day? He was a pallbearer at 3 funerals. That's still happening. And it means they're going to need a larger army, standing army, and that's money. I mean, that's going to mean higher taxes, which is a burden on that great, startup nation economy of theirs. What should we be doing? Well, I think we should be doing a lot of what President Biden has been doing. First, his trip way back last year, and fast forward to right now, sending the missile defenses, the THAAD system, because we want to deter Iran from even trying to hit Israel again. And if they try it, obviously we want to help with the defense. I worry about one thing, and I'm going to stop with this. No one has really had a good theory of what's the future of Gaza. I mean, I've heard people, including people in the US government, say it's easy. 2-state solution. That's not easy. It is not easy. Tell me who's going to govern Gaza and provide security in Gaza if and when the IDF pulls out. Suppose you have a ceasefire tomorrow. So let's be really optimistic. We have a ceasefire and the hostages are released. It's wonderful. Who's governing Gaza? Who's providing security? Who's preventing Hamas from rebuilding? Very, very difficult. I've seen 10 different plans. I was part of a group that wrote one of them. They're all, sensible, but none of them has been adopted. None of them has been implemented. So Israel continues to face enormous challenges, and what I think we, the United States, should be doing is saying, we will continue, whoever's president, we will continue to have your back. And we won't, I hope, always be saying, don't do this and don't do that, and don't confront Iran, because sometimes, and we've seen it now, not only in Gaza, we saw it in Beirut, and we've seen it in Iran. Sometimes fighting back, sometimes confronting, is the best thing that Israel can do, because if and when they lose that sense on the part of their enemies that they are ferocious and you'd better not take them on, if they lose that, then they're in real danger. Okay, I'm going to stop with that and try to leave as much time as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot. So we have time for questions. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please just raise your hand, and I'll come around.
First of all, I want to thank you for your illustrious career and service as an American and a Jew. I'm very grateful for all your work. My question is, I was wondering, I'm wondering if I think it was Bret Stephens wrote an article a couple of weeks ago, The Day the Jews Woke Up. I don't know if you saw it, the op-ed. And what's your sense of, has there always been anti-Semitism that we Jews have been ignoring? And if you could answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there's more anti-Semitism in this sense. If you were not an anti-Semite on October 1st last year, did you all of a sudden become one overnight? I don't think so. I think what we're seeing is people acting it out, feeling somehow free to act it out. Why is this? Well, I blame President Trump partly for just sort of changing the discourse in the country. I blame the college administrators a lot. In Florida, University of Florida, after October 7th, they started having pro-Hamas demonstrations. And the president of the university then, Ben Sasse, former senator, said, hey, we don't do daycare. We don't do daycare. This is a university. We have rules. The rules have not changed. You knew them when you arrived on campus. If you break them, you're going to be off campus. That was the end. This also happened at two or three, very few, but 2 or 3 other universities where instantly the people running the place said, oh no, no. We don't have anti-Semitic activities on this campus. You're out. At MIT, the president instantly said, we're going to suspend anybody who engages in this behavior. And then 2 weeks later, she said, oh, sorry, some of them are foreign students, and they'd lose their immigration status if we suspended them, so that's off. And I remember thinking, why is that off? They didn't come here to demonstrate against the Jews. In many, many universities, most I'd say, suspensions, discipline was announced, and a month later, 3 months later, it disappears. So what's the message? The message to those groups is there's no penalty, there's no price, just keep it up. So I blame them a lot for kind of normalizing this activity on campus. I don't think there are more Americans who are anti-Semitic, but obviously we're seeing a lot more of it in public. Most of it off campus is illegal, it breaks the law, and people should be punished for doing this. And I think it's very, very unfortunate that in so many cities and states around the country, they're not paying a price for doing this. If you did this kind of activity targeted at any other minority group in America, you wouldn't get away with it, and you shouldn't get away with it for doing it to Jews.
Thank you also, Elliot, for your service, although I know that's become a cliche. Your talk, interestingly enough, started very similarly to the way a talk by Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman began here several years ago about how members of our generation grew up in homes and in families with those immigrant grandparents, and our Jewish continuity and identity is not questioned, is not going away. And how are we going to continue that? And one of the things we did here at Temple Beth-El is we got involved with a project relating to what's called relational Judaism and synagogue transformation. And we went through this thing called Project To Be. And Ron Wolfson and Rabbi Hoffman are kind of the chief proponents of this. I'm wondering to what extent you're familiar with their thoughts, and to what extent you do or don't subscribe to those ideas about how we continue Judaism in the United States.
Thank you. I do know Larry Hoffman. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, friend of Frank and Leslie, and he's terrific. I'm a little bit familiar. A number of rabbis have said to me after the book was published, you've got 3 suggestions: education, summer camp, Israel. Where's the synagogue? Okay, special pleading because they're rabbis, but I just wonder about the role of the synagogue, because you got to get people to synagogue. in a certain sense, I'm thinking more, writing more about people who aren't in synagogues, who have a different kind of Jewish identity. The Pew study has an interesting division, JBR and JNR, Jews by religion and Jews of no religion. 27% of American Jews say they're Jewish, but they have no religion. Judaism is not their religion. Well, what about those people? That's a lot, 27%. And how about the rest of us? Of course, what do you mean by Judaism is your religion? There's a lot of people in that category who, well, tell me what you mean by that. Do you belong to a synagogue? No. Do you ever go to it? No. Are you Jew? No, but you're a Jew by religion. How do you reach those people? I think you're not, I think, going to reach them on the education part. But on Israel and the summer camping, I think you may have a better shot than through the synagogue. The synagogue is obviously central to American Jewish life, as the church is to American Christian life, but I'm tending to look at the non-synagogue ways of approaching this more than they are.
I add my thanks to you with everyone else's for being here and for this discussion. We need a PR program. That's what Israel needs now. We need young, gorgeous people, whether they're from Israel or from the States or from various colleges, to go on the web and say, hey, buddy, this is what's going on. This is who you should, come join us. You know, this is, some of these things are really lies. You don't know. They don't need a 1-hour program. They need, 5 bullet points. Excuse the word bullet, but five points. This really isn't the truth because this is. This isn't the truth because this is. We love you. Come join us. We're Jews, or we're, young Republicans or young Democrats for Israel, whatever. That's what we really need now, a pushback. It's a real pushback, and it has to be attractive and glitzy, something that will bring in not my age group, we're with Israel, but even our grandchildren, who are all ours, all members of synagogues. The oldest has already been with us to Israel. We did that one. We're waiting for the others to get old enough and for peace. But even with that, they need it because they go to colleges where they're in the very, very small minority. So please, can you address that deeply?
Thanks, Dorothy. First, on the colleges, one thing worth saying. As a community, we've been trying for 100 years to go to the most prestigious colleges. And now we find that some of those most prestigious colleges don't want us. I went to Harvard, as Frank did. When we were there, 1960s, it was, 1/3 Jewish, certainly 30% Jewish. It's not half that now. And it's the same in a lot of the universities. They don't seem to want Jews, and they're not very friendly to Jews. And so I think Jewish parents have to ask, do you want to send your kid to a battlefield, or do you want to send them to a school that wants them? I'll give you just one example. There are many. University of Florida. Do you know University of Florida has more Jews than any other school in America? 9,000 Jewish students. Okay, it's not the most prestigious. It's not Ivy League. It's just below. But as you think about what's going on campuses, I think we need as a community to think about it, not just in terms of prestige, but in terms of what is the experience of 4 years going to be for a Jewish student. Now, your point, it's amazing in a way, right? America's not good at this anymore. Israel's not good at this. We invented this. When I say we, America, we invented Hollywood, but the Jews invented Hollywood. In many of the companies, the Jews invented Madison Avenue. We can't seem to do it. The Israeli word for it is hasbara. You look around the world, and the hostility is enormous. Now, some of it is pure anti-Semitism. It's pure hatred of Jews. That doesn't mean we can't do better. And the Israelis have gotten, they have some younger spokespeople now. But all I can do is agree with you. It's remarkable how poor they, the Israelis, and we, the American Jewish community, are. But I can tell you it's broader than that. I mean, just take one example from Iran. What do young Iranians who want to get the news listen to? Voice of America? No. No. They listen to BBC Persian. They listen to Iran International, which is a Saudi anti-Iranian station. They listen to the stations that Iranian exiles have in Los Angeles. And we can't, as a government, we don't seem to be able to do it or do it well. And we haven't been for decades. And every time we get a new president, I think to myself, okay, this is a real opportunity for change. And it never happens. So I agree. We need to work on it. The Israelis need to work on it. And we're doing pretty badly.
Hi, thank you for coming. Going back to the campus issue, my friends who listen to Rupert Murdoch's Fox News both say to me, well, those protests are being organized and paid for by George Soros. So, and then I went to hear Dara Horn at a UJA event, and she said, oh no, that's Hamas paying and organizing for all these protests. Do you have any insight? Dara Horn wrote People Love Dead Jews.
Yeah.
She's immersed. So I'm just wondering if you have any insight into the organizations, if there are any, on the protests at the universities.
I think we do not know because there's no one cause. Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a despicable organization in my opinion. You know who is among the largest donors to Jewish Voice for Peace? The Rockefeller Brothers Fund. That's a fact. You can look it up, as the saying goes. You can Google it. They are giving money to a lot of radical, extremist, so-called Jewish organizations. Students for Justice in Palestine. Rockefeller Brothers Fund. So there's one example. It's not Soros. It's not Hamas. It's an American, big American charity. I'm sure there's money coming in from overseas. Why wouldn't there be? If you were the government of Iran, you'd love this, so you'd want to support it. Soros does give money to those groups, Students for Justice in Palestine. What percentage of their budget? I don't know. But it's coming from lots of different places. The most recent demonstrations, that is to say, right now, the last few weeks, seem to be about half non-students. That's another important fact. This is what's led some schools to try to close off the campus because half the people there, they're not students at all. There's another question here, and I mentioned it in the book, but it's mentioned in every study, which is that a lot of those protesting are Muslim. And Muslim students, but also non-students, again. Who's paying for that? I would say we don't know the full picture, but we can see some of the sources. I would just suggest no boogeyman here. There's no one source for this. Unfortunately, there's a lot of them.
I have a question, Elliot.
Do you get to ask a question? Wait a minute.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question. So back to the point that you made a few minutes ago about synagogues and
Yes.
and religiosity in America, which, of course, we know is on the decline, not only in Judaism but just generally speaking. In your vision of the three-prong approach to sustaining Judaism in the next generation, do you envision the Judaism of the future, of the younger generations now, as that is that a less religiously oriented Judaism? Is it more of a cultural or ethnic Judaism? Can you describe your vision of the Judaism of the future?
We start with the Orthodox, who are about 10% of the American Jewish community. But that's if you look at the whole community. If you look at 5-year-old kids, they're more than 10%. So they'll be a bigger part of the community in 2030, 2040, 2050. Demography is, in a certain sense, destiny. Instead of being 10%, maybe it'll be 15% at some point. They're 17% of the 5-year-olds. So it's growing. That's one piece of the community, tending to grow internally, not through conversion of Reform or conservative Jews to Orthodoxy. The conservative movement is in big trouble. I think you know this statistically. You know, you can find synagogues that are very vital and growing, but as a movement, if however way you want to judge it, how many people say I'm a conservative Jew? How many synagogues are there? What's the membership? There's a real decline there. My answer to your question is, for the non-Orthodox, I do think that there will be fewer Jews who are attracted to their Jewish identity, the sense of peoplehood, through religion. In fact, I do talk about this a bit in the book. For many young Jews, it's a barrier. That is, they kind of feel Jewish, and people tell them Judaism is a religion, and here's what you need to do. Well, they don't want to do that. So for them, for many of them, Zionism is a terrific alternative. It is something that they can be proud of, support for Israel, time in Israel, that doesn't involve the religion that they don't actually practice. So I think yes, that the Jewish community of, I don't know, 2050, let's say, not that far away, is a community in which there will be fewer people diligently practicing the religion, but I hope more people with a stronger attachment to their Jewish identity.
Yeah, just going back to Iran for a moment, like everyone in the room, I've read hundreds of thousands of words about the resistance groups they support, if not millions of words, but very little in the way of background on what are the basic roots of the tremendous antipathy that Iran holds toward Israel. Is it based in religion, the Koran, a desire to just simply dominate the entire area, that the Jews simply don't belong? As someone who knows Iran very well, what are your insights on that?
I want to start by saying, like you, I always use the word Iran. We should really be talking about the Islamic Republic, the regime, the Ayatollahs. The people of Iran hate that regime. I mean, every few years they rise up against it, and so far they've been crushed. But there's no question that if there were a plebiscite, do you want this Islamic Republic, or do you want to be a normal country? We know how people would vote. So we're talking about the Ayatollahs. I think it's a combination of two things. They do want to dominate the region and its oil and gas supplies. They want to dominate the Persian Gulf. What stops them from dominating the whole Middle East? Israel. If you eliminate Israel, which they would like to do, things are looking good for them. Who's going to push back against them? They may want to, but they can't. The Saudis, Emiratis, Bahrainis, it's just Israel. So from a kind of raison d'etat point of view, from the point of view of the power of the state, they want to dominate, they want to get hold of those riches, and that means they need to get rid of Israel. Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic, was motivated, as is the current Supreme Leader, Khamenei, by religion. It is not acceptable that there be Jews in these lands. oh, maybe, maybe as kind of peasants paying special taxes, but to have a country and an army, not acceptable. I think the Iranians have it in mind. They can't do it now, but they would like to get hold of Mecca and Medina. Why do these Sunni royals have control of Mecca and Medina? We should have control of Mecca and Medina. I think that's part of the plan as well. And then, of course, Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. So it's national interest as they define it, and it's their religion as they define it. If you think of the Middle East without the Islamic Republic, Iran is a normal country, okay? They've had a revolution. They've gotten rid of the Ayatollahs. Wow. Lebanon changes because they're no longer supporting Hezbollah, can go back to being a democracy. Gaza and the West Bank are different because the Iranians are not supporting terrorism. Iraq is different because they're not supporting the Shia. The whole Yemen is different. The whole Middle East changes. And we should be very, very much in favor of that happening. And the only people actually pushing it right now, Israel. While this government, this regime rules in Iran, peace is not going to come to the Middle East because, there's one example in the world of a government saying that country should not exist and we want to try to destroy it. And that's what Israel is to the Iranians. They want to destroy the state of Israel. There's no other example of this on the face of the earth. And until that stops, I think we're kidding ourselves to think there will really be peace in the region.
Okay. Gary?
Thank you, Elliot. And as others have said, thank you for your service. And I've been following what you've been doing for the government and for the United States and for Jews for decades. And thank you for everything that you've done.
Thanks.
If Iran is the pivotal problem, and I understand it's the Islamic Republic, why has the United States not taken the steps necessary to remove that regime? Why has there been this long-standing, almost policy of appeasement? Why can't the United States lead the other Arab nations to deal with this issue?
That's a great question.
I don't understand it.
It's a great question. Iran, started, remember, 1979, the first thing they did in the Islamic Republic was take over the U.S. Embassy and take hostages. Since then, it's 45 years, they've been killing Americans. The Marine barracks in Beirut, 241 American Marines dead. Khobar Towers, which was a residence for American soldiers in Saudi Arabia. In the Iraq War, they killed hundreds of Americans. And we've never responded. We've never responded, with two exceptions. Reagan did in 1988. They attacked an American ship, so he basically sank their navy. And then the killing of Soleimani. Whenever we confront them, they step back. I think they're evil in that regime, but they're not crazy. So when we push, they know what the power balance is. They step back. When we invaded Iraq in 2003, they suspended their nuclear program. I can tell you at the end of the Trump administration, there were lots of attacks by Iranian proxies in Syria and Iraq trying to kill Americans. And at the end of the summer of 2020, we passed messages to them saying, if one of your proxies kills an American, we're going to strike at Iran, not at some proxy someplace. 90% reduction in the number of those attacks. They're not crazy. Why haven't we done it more? I think first because they have a really, really smart idea, which is proxies. Proxies. We don't attack the United States. It's Hezbollah. It's the Houthis. The Houthis are shooting missiles at American Navy ships right now. There are no Houthi missiles. The Houthis don't build ballistic missiles. They get them from Iran, and they shoot them. And Iran says, what are you looking at us for? And we have let them get away with this. Why? I think it's partly a desire to avoid war, very commendable. A desire to avoid confrontation if we can avoid it. Sometimes we push back a bit and they move back and they stop for a few years. We've also been, I don't mean to be flippant about this, but we've been busy. We've had other things. We've had the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war. Now it's a matter of trying to help Israel, and I think it's a mistake what we're doing. I think that, and this is, I have to say, a bipartisan mistake. Presidents of both, it's 45 years, we've had presidents of both parties. I think it's a terrible mistake because it has taught the Iranians they can get away with a lot. And they can get away with it if they just do the proxy bit. Now, they've changed that with Israel for the first time. They attacked Israel directly in April. And then again. They haven't changed it with us. Only proxies. And I think we should be making it a lot clearer that we're not going to put up with it anymore. The desire to avoid a conflict with Iran is, or anybody else, is commendable. But I think history has proved that when we stand up to Iran, they step back, and we should be doing that. And I hope that will happen under whoever is elected president. It's really time to put an end to this. The Israelis have started by decimating and decapitating Hamas and Hezbollah. And we ought to tell the Iranians, this is over. This game is over.
We're going to take one last question. Stephen has it.
All right, well, thank you again, as everyone else has. So, getting to anti-Semitism, I just had a couple of thoughts I wanted to think, just your reflection on this. I thought years ago, meaning 2 or 3 years ago, it seems like there's been a vacuum, and I feel like the anti-Semitism in college campuses, where young people grow up hating Israel, it's been going on for 20, 30 years. I don't think this is 2 years old. And I don't feel like, I agree with you, Israel needs to do so much more with public relations and making their own case. So part of it is, I don't know what specific could be done to do that. Set up a fund, have speakers go right into these people, talk to them right where they are and say, look, this is Israel's story. We've offered the West Bank and Gaza, we've offered them 98% of the land 3 times and got turned down. And none of these kids know that. They grow up just thinking Israel's, reflectively they grow up, when you go to college and hear Israel's the bad guy for 4 years, and this isn't even necessarily the Jewish kids, obviously, it stays with your whole life. So I guess I have 2 things. If there's a way to do more specific things to get people to go to these colleges, confront this right where it starts. And then the other thing is, would it be possible, I don't know if this is a crazy idea or not, is to use satire or comedy to try to ridicule anti-Semitism. Make it unacceptable, just make it seem stupid. Like if there's a way to do that creatively, go at it sideways, the problem. So I was wondering what you thought of that.
Well, on the latter part, I think a lot of the people who'd be best at this have avoided it as too political, too controversial, and they shouldn't. Others, including some of the leading Jewish, Seinfeld, good example, have really become much more Zionist in the last year. You're right about the ignorance. We've joked about from the river to the sea, and you've seen these TV interviews where they ask these demonstrators, what river and what sea? And people say, the Nile? They don't know. But the Jewish kids often don't know either. They have a sense that they're being attacked, but they don't have the facts. Well, there are a lot of efforts to do this. There are a lot of good Hillels that have become more active in the last year. There are all sorts of, college educational efforts, but I think there's a very deep problem here. We are trying to push back a tide here, and the tide is the faculties. You can change, and you've seen it in the last year. This president is fired, then that president is fired, then that. You can do that overnight. the faculties have tenure. What are they teaching? I mean, I think we've gotten a little insight at a lot of, again, the top 50 schools by prestige at what's being taught in these Middle East Studies courses. There's a thing called the Middle East Studies Association. This is the Association of Professors of Middle East Studies in the US, thousands of members. It's unbelievable. 100% anti-Israel, 100% biased. And this is the professional association. So what are their members teaching? You take a course on Middle Eastern studies in the average American college. That's what you're getting. Colonialist, imperialist, usurpers, murderers, that's what you're getting. That's going to be very, very hard to change. I mean, I think my advice to college students would be never take a Middle East Studies course unless you know the professor very well, because you're going to be getting that same very biased view of the Middle East. Now, there are ways of approaching that. I mean, example, Georgetown. The Georgetown Middle East Study, unbelievable, anti-Israel for 20 years, 30 years. So somebody gave some money to establish a Jewish Studies Center. Very small, then larger, now gives courses. I taught there for several years. Dennis Ross teaches there. He and I were teaching a course on Israeli-Palestinian relations. So we came at them from the side. Nobody got fired, nobody lost tenure, but you as a student could take a course that wasn't anti-Israel. And there are such things on campuses. There's no one answer here, but there are more efforts now to educate American kids. I mean, if you want it, let's say you have a young relative who wants to learn more. You could do 1 hour of Googling and find a lot of offers, of opportunities, of online courses, of courses at various universities, of Hillels and Chabads at universities. So there is a beginning of a reaction, but the reaction is against a reality. And the reality is that most college faculties, and particularly most Near East or Middle East faculties, are teaching a deeply anti-Israel curriculum. And that's going to be very, very difficult to change. I don't think we can go through them. I think we have to go around them.
Elliot, I want to thank you for being here today and for your wonderful, insightful presentation. Let's give Elliot a hand. Thanks so much. These topics are interesting to you. We do have a couple of other speakers this week that are touching on similar issues. On Tuesday night, we have adult learning with Dr. Alyssa Gray from Hebrew Union College on the land of Israel in the Talmud to help us understand the relationship of Judaism in the land of Israel. And then this coming weekend, we have Rabbi Esther Letterman, who is the vice president of the URJ, who's going to be here to talk about the future of synagogue life here going forward, very much connected to what Elliot's saying. So I hope you can come for those things. We are going to go downstairs now. We have copies of Elliot's book, If You Will It, for sale, and he will sign the book for you. And we also have brunch. So please join us downstairs in the lobby. And Elliot, again, thank you so much for being here.